Okay, so Andrew Shouldice is here, and as I was saying earlier, if you're not aware of his name, you've definitely heard of Tunic. So, absolute. I was at the Canadian Game Awards last year, and I watched his teammates up and down the stairs like 7 times. Except Game Awards, he owned it. So, I'm not going to speak too much here. I'm just going to send it right over to him because let's be real, he's who you want to hear from. Hold on. I'm going to attach that.
Check. Good. Okay. I've been told that sometimes I speak too softly. Give me one of these if I'm being too quiet, okay? Am I being too quiet? You good? Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Andrew Shouldice, and this talk is called This Was Here the Whole Time, which is mostly a design talk about the game Tunic, which I worked on with some pals of mine. Tunic is who knows about Tunic, who's played it, seen it? Okay. Okay, awesome, cool, thank you. Tunic is an isometric action adventure about a tiny fox in a big world where you explore the wilderness, fight monsters, and find secrets. Here are some pictures from it. There are those 3 things: explore, fight, and secrets. Briefly, the exploration part is a bunch of large, open, sort of exterior areas that are interconnected with one another, sometimes with non-obvious paths, and then there are some more traditional indoor dungeon type areas. The fighting is dodge roll focused, the sort of game where you need to observe what your enemies are doing. There's some light stamina management, and there are consumable items that you can collect and use, and big bosses as well. Secrets, there's lots and lots of secrets in the game, and they range from little non-obvious paths that you can go down even if you didn't notice them, hidden mechanics, and larger, more elaborate puzzles that sometimes reach outside the game itself. An important component of the game is the manual, which is styled to look like an old NES instruction booklet style thing that's got everything you would expect there, like maps and to-do lists and explanations of mechanics and stuff like that, lore and bestiaries, and even some memo pages at the back. So there will be some spoilers. It seems like a fair number of people have checked it out, but I'm sorry if this ruins some things for you, if you were planning on playing it. Okay, so quick outline. I'm going to talk about the design goals for the game, and then I'm going to introduce this sort of way of thinking about the life cycle of a secret, and show how that in making Tunic, thinking about this life cycle helped sort of achieve those design goals, which were to add mystery to the game. And if we have time, we're going to talk about hiding things in plain sight, why I think that's cool, and how we went about doing it, again, to sort of work on those design goals. Caveat, this is meant to be descriptive, not prescriptive. That is to say, this is how we did it working on Tunic. This is not saying that this is the one way you've got to make your video games, obviously. Okay, so what were those design goals? Well, before I started working on the game, I had this really specific, like, emotional payload that I wanted to build a game around, and it doesn't have really clean way of expressing it. But I dug up an old notebook that I was using well before I started working on the game, and I looked through it, and it has some phrases like "you are off the beaten path," actually discovering things, depth that is to be discovered and explored and not doled out at the appropriate time, complexity and depth that is not designed away, it's not inaccessible by intent, it's not simply behind a locked door, feeling like you've really discovered something, this feeling like you've discovered an always extant mechanic, this was here all along. So this was the feeling, and you could tell as I'm scrawling this stuff that I'm not doing an especially good job of articulating it succinctly. But that was the idea, this really particular feeling that I wanted to communicate. And so I have, here's me thinking about these ideas, and then 7 years passed, and I worked on a video game. But then people would cite that same emotional response when they played the game, the people that liked it at least. So something went right. Something during those 7 years was able to communicate this idea all the way along. And so why am I telling you this? I'm just going to call it mystery, this really specific emotional feeling, which is not a good word because it sounds like a whodunit. That's not the idea. It's not that type of mystery, but it's more succinct than the excitement of not knowing, or rather of knowing there's lots to know, but not knowing it yet, and knowing you could know, but no one's expecting you to know. Some people know that you know, you do eventually. Anyway, so you get the idea. Like that's the feeling that I'm talking about. That particular flavor of mystery and excitement. I'm just going to call it mystery. As an aside, a couple years after I wrote that list, I played a game called Frog Fractions by a developer named Jim Stormdancer, who has a really, really excellent talk called Preserving a Sense of Discovery in the Age of Spoilers, which I highly recommend you check out. And in it, Jim describes playing a game in his childhood as entering an unknowable world operating under confusing rules where anything could happen. And I think that that's just a wonderful and delicious way of describing this particular type of excitement playing a game. So here's this model, this life cycle of a secret that I'd like to introduce. And this would apply to sort of anything that is worthy of being called a secret or a feature or anything in your video game. First phase is ignorance, where you don't know about it. Then you have knowledge, where you do know about it, but you don't understand it. And then understanding, when you do understand it. And as an example, let's say you're exploring and you find a weird item. You now have knowledge of it, but you don't know what it's for. And eventually you might find out, oh, it's for upgrading my stats. Great, now I understand what it's for. And that question mark gets turned into an exclamation point. We can sort of arrange them in a ladder like this, and we as human beings, as people who play games, we want to ascend this ladder. We have motivation to progress. And the motivation that we have to go from ignorance to knowledge is curiosity and exploration. Where if we're given the opportunity to go and find things, we will go and do it. And then when we do find something, that's a discovery. We've gone from ignorance up to knowledge. And then our motivation switches. We have a sort of a change where now we're going into a puzzle-solving mode. We have knowledge of something. We have the jigsaw pieces, and we want to try and figure out how they all fit together. And when we do that, when we go from that question mark to the exclamation point, that's the aha moment. And that is understanding. And puzzle games, this is where their bread and butter is. That aha moment is what you're playing a puzzle game for. And it's great. That's catharsis. That's, satisfaction. I like, when I'm playing games, to hang out in this middle area, though, the knowledge phase, where I have a bunch of ideas in my mind, but I'm not sure how they all fit together. It's that anticipatory moment. And the reason for that, I think, is that when you have a question mark and it gets transformed into this exclamation point, this moment of discovery, or of understanding rather, I get it, it's all clicking together. The luster of it eventually fades, and then the joy of having made that discovery fades as well, and then you forget about it. And that's fine, it was worth it to have that moment of joy, but it's a little bit like Tetris. This is what we're playing Tetris for. This is awesome. We're about to get a Tetris, right? Yeah! And now everybody close their eyes. Close your eyes. I'm going to close my eyes too. And now look. This is way less exciting. This is just the next thing that happened. And ostensibly, this is a better state to be in. The score is higher. But the part that is awesome is gone, right? It was that anticipation of getting the thing that was really cool and awesome. So, to that end, I'm going to extend this model of that three-phase thing into keeping track of concepts in your game, secrets, whatever, as little paths. They open there on the left and they go off to the right and they sort of disappear into, who knows, question mark, into the mist. Paths disappearing into a forest, however you want to think about it. And every part of your game could be thought of as one of these. So there's a giant door up in the mountains. I don't know what it's about. There's this weird item that I found, and I'm not sure what it's for. There's a monolith up on the cliffside, chest I couldn't get to. What's this holy cross I keep hearing about? This tomb is too dark. I want to explore it, but I can't. What are these gold platforms for? All of these things are open-ended questions in the player's mind. So mapping that onto this three-cycle thing, we have ignorance, which is you haven't discovered the thing. knowledge, which is you've discovered it but you don't understand it, which could be, oh, I saw a chest that I can't get to. And then understanding, when the path is closed off, you get your catharsis, your exclamation point. I found the chest and there was $20 in it, hooray. So this is an example of it just dead ending simply like that. Open your chest, there's $20. But there are other ways that paths can terminate. So for instance, two paths can combine. So I think I can upgrade my stats somehow. And I found a weird item, I'm not sure what it's for, can come together to be, I can use the weird upgrade or item to upgrade my stats. And they come together and you get this, exclamation point, this moment of satisfaction. Sometimes they give rise to new paths, such as, how do I get to this area? What are these gold platforms for? Aha, the gold platforms are some kind of teleporter, and there's this spirit realm sort of warp zone area that I can also explore. And I like having lots of these paths in my head when I play games. Oh yeah, what's up with this warp zone? And I think that's because curiosity and speculation are fun. That is sort of an exciting, juicy part of the game playing experience. So let's say you have this setup of paths in your mind with a bunch of open ends, and as you're playing, you might start to let your imagination run wild and think, maybe they connect like this, or 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 like maybe all of these threads come together in some huge revelation that explodes outward, and right, that's really exciting. That's a fun thing, fun mode to be in when you're playing a game. So tips so far: have lots of paths, make them connect in meaningful ways, add new paths constantly. Easy, right? Well, it's all content. Right? Content is hard. That's the hard thing, right? Is making good content that is tested, bug free, and works, and is fun, and blah 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 blah. So I'm going to try and give some more practical tips that we tried to do with Tunic that are being economical with your paths. One is just introduce things early. So having those open-ended paths is what's exciting. So introducing them early means that they have open-ended paths in their mind earlier. And we do this all the time, normal game design stuff, like show someone the chest early so that they're excited about the reward that they're going to get. But I think this works for mysterious things as well, like this platform. People don't know what this is. It appears very early in the game, but it's meant to introduce this idea of, here's something you don't know about. You're tantalized. There's a mysterious language in the game, and the idea is that we introduce it very, very early, and for basically the entire game is this open-ended question: what is this all about? Doors that you haven't unlocked yet. There's a secret path here early in the game that shows you this mysterious black monolith that you probably haven't seen before, and we introduce it early to seed the player's mind with these feelings of excitement. Another way is to break things up. Like say you have one path, try and extricate individual elements of that path. So you've got two things to be excited about. So for instance, one of those monoliths that I talked about is shown here, but we don't show it immediately next to these glowing paths on the ground. And that's because they're related and we wanted to keep them separate. So instead of, we show them later, like, oh, these things are related, it's some sort of like massive power grid. Instead of having, oh, there's a weird power grid, what's up with that? There are these black monoliths, these purple traces on the ground. And then when they come together, it's satisfying because they are actually a meaningful connection. They're related to one another. And so when they have the revelation, oh, it's a power grid, then it's a little bit more meaningful. Not only did you have the joy of not knowing about those two paths, you have a satisfying resolution to them that gives rise to a new question. Being careful with symmetry is helpful, I think. So ragging on Zelda here a little bit, which I love. A dungeon has a theme, a gimmick, a special item, a boss, and a MacGuffin, and once you know that there are 6 dungeons or whatever, you can grid out the entire game, and that's very satisfying in some ways. You sort of, it's comforting, I know it's coming, everything's fine, but it means that you're sort of prematurely cauterizing the wonder of not knowing about something. You've drawn a box around your game a little bit. You get to a point where you see an icon, and again, I don't mean to rag on this game in particular too much, but I remember seeing that and just feeling kind of exhausted. Like, okay, I know what I'm going to get. I know what the boss is going to be. I know that I need to come back to this area. If I instead, and a lot of this has to do with prior knowledge of the genre and stuff like that, but if you saw a mysterious thing and you were actually confused about what it could possibly mean, that's a lot more exciting than having something that you know to be very symmetrical and you know what to expect. And Zelda does this a little bit, Tunic does not, but I think a really cool thing to do would be to violate that symmetry and instead, take that grid and add a new dimension to it suddenly. I think that would be pretty mind-blowing. In Tunic, the upgrade items used to be these very generic-looking sort of coin shapes that were prototyped here, and the problem with that was they looked boring, first of all, but once you collected a couple of them, you could easily, mentally grid out expectations for what the rest of them were going to be, less exciting. So they were changed to be, you can make the same connections as a player, but there's a little bit more interest there if they're strange objects as opposed to something more homogeneous. Avoiding upper bounds is a strategy, leaving the possibility of more even when there isn't. So Tunic has plenty of upper bounds. There's 3 MacGuffins, and they slot into the inventory, and here's a checklist, and here's a bunch of plinths that you put stuff on. So there's plenty of situations where there are upper bounds there, but I like the places where we managed to not have them. So for instance, this UI looks full, but there is actually an extra item you can collect, and instead of remaking the UI to accommodate it nicely, it just sort of sits onto the end there. And the hope was that someone playing the game would feel like, wow, even the UI is breaking its own rules. What else is this? Right? Specifically, making the player think, anything I thought I finished, maybe I haven't. And I think that's really exciting. This is a tricky one, having at least some secrets be a really big deal. And you can't just tack this on, obviously, but it only takes a couple of circumstances, a couple of instances of having their mind blown, having one of those threads that actually surprisingly explodes out into a bunch of new threads, to make people speculate, right? They're going to take their mental threads and start to think, oh, maybe this is the thing that's going to really bust this thing wide open, right? What's going to blow my mind next? And I'll talk a little bit more about those as we did it in Tunic, but there are such circumstances where there's a certain input you could do that you could have done the whole time that we don't. We try not to spill the beans on for a while, and then something else even later game that's sort of similar. Okay, making good time. So this was here all along is, I think, a really neat thing. And that's a bit weird because what is this was here all along? It is, I'll define it really roughly. It's when you find a thing you could have found earlier, but you didn't. Nothing was preventing you from having found it earlier, you just found it later. And that seems like a really weird thing to find neat, but I'm going to try and articulate why I think it's cool and some ways that we tried to put that into the game. Also, people who end up liking the game bring it up sort of a weird amount of the time, like, oh yeah, it's just all these things where there were secrets that were here the whole time. So why is that thing in particular cool? One reason is verisimilitude or realness. So just like in real life, things don't magically appear when they are ready to be found. They exist and you find them when you find them, if that makes sense. So it makes your worlds seem a little bit more real if people start to realize that the world exists as this artifact that is ambivalent to them as the player. It merely exists and they're encouraged to explore it as they do. So there's this game called Her Story by Sam Barlow. You know Her Story? Yes, no, maybe a few people? Okay. Yeah. It is a game where you are trying to solve a mystery by looking at a footage from an interrogation. And it's broken up into clips, and you find new clips by searching it via its transcript. So you type in a word like murder or help, and it gives you chronologically the first 5 clips that feature that word. And that's basically the extent of the nuts and bolts of the game. And the rest of the content is in the script and the performance in the clips. And at that point, when you make that realization as a player, you realize, wait a second, I'm actually doing some detective work here, right? There isn't some designer hovering over my shoulder gently guiding me. I mean, they are, but it doesn't seem like they are. It feels like honest archaeology, right? It feels like you're digging where you dig. You are doing sort of real work. You might discover things in a string. You might bumble into an important secret just because you happen to type in the right string. And that is exciting. Another reason why this was here all along is cool is because of exclusion. Because you found something and you could have found it earlier, but you didn't, that means you may never have found it, which means not necessarily everyone is going to find it, which means that you are special. And that feels good, to feel like you found something sort of optional and exclusive. Getting in over your head is a neat thing. So let's say, as here, you accidentally bumble into an area of the game that's way above your pay grade. That's neat, because maybe you are totally trounced by the enemies there or something like that, or the puzzles are too hard, and you have to come back later. That feels neat because it feels, again, like there wasn't a designer directing you and crafting your experience and gently massaging your behavior so you go in exactly the right place. It feels like you found something you weren't supposed to. And that's neat, because if you do manage to make headway in this area, you've got this exciting new thread that feels sort of almost forbidden. Or maybe you get, again, like maybe you don't do well and you need to come back later, you now have this thread or this path in your mind of something really tantalizing that you're excited to go back to. This was here all along is cool because of personal stories. Because you can do things in any order, that means that you are more likely to have a personal connection with your individual experience with it. Whether that's a story that you tell someone or just the memories that you have of it, it becomes a little bit more intimately connected with you as a person. There's also replayability. So if you can do things in other orders, then it warrants going back to the game and realizing that you can experience it in a different way. Speedrunners take advantage of this a lot. And this is sort of a strange one. I think optional stuff can feel less overwhelming. So if you bumble into something and your gamer sense is sort of telling you, I'm not supposed to be here, that's fine, because if it's too hard or too confusing, or you're confronted with a big, wall of stats in a menu that you feel like you weren't supposed to find yet, you kind of know that it's not going to be on the test, because you know that the game didn't direct you towards it explicitly. You can sort of take it easy and know that you don't need to worry too much about it. And maybe the most important thing related to all of this, and why this was here all along is neat, is players start to ask, what else are you not telling me? Which is really exciting. So the example that people give a lot is bombable walls in Zelda 1. And because Zelda 1 is very old, and also people know about bombable walls, it might make sense to instead of thinking about this game, think about some game that you are very familiar with. Like, what is a game that someone is really familiar with and probably doesn't have bombable walls in it? Do we have a suggestion? Hollow Knight. Okay, wait, it has secret passages, right?
Yeah.
Secret passages.
What's that?
They're not bombable.
They're not bombable. Okay.
There are secret passages.
Let's say you're playing a game like Hollow Knight or something like that, and you discover a new type of secret passage, that you didn't know existed before, and that would be exciting, right? It suddenly makes you realize that everything you thought was a dead end is potentially no longer a dead end. Maybe there's something there. And so, for instance, let's say we have this in our mind, that we're playing a game and this is our mental model of the current open threads. And we spend our time thinking about things on this right-hand side. Everything else is dead-ended or joined up or whatever. But the moment we find, this bombable wall equivalent, or basically a situation where you thought you had a dead end, but it wasn't, like this, you start to ask questions like, maybe this thing up there that I thought was a dead end isn't a dead end at all. Maybe this one also branches off. Maybe there's all kinds of places that I haven't discovered. There's this new dimension added to your game. And that's why I think this was here all along is really neat. And here are some things that we tried to do to help promote that feeling in Tunic. Main one, sort of encapsulating all the others, is letting the player transgress, bumble around, do things that they're not supposed to do. And this is not easy. It requires having that design consideration from the get-go mostly, but it's a good thing to keep in mind if you're making at least this type of game. I think it's valuable to consider, hey, we really want the player to stay here, what bad thing would happen if they didn't? You know, would it be okay to let them wander off? Maybe erring on that side might help people have those sorts of experiences where they feel like they found something that they weren't meant to that is really exciting. Another thing that we did is we talked about using soft gates instead of hard gates. So a hard gate, at least in the way that we use the terminology, is you'll really need the key to get through this door. You know, there's a wall here, you can't get through it until you have the key, or you need to talk to this NPC before the quest starts, or whatever. Versus a soft gate, which is, yeah, there is a key, but you can get away with something if you're feeling clever. So in Tunic, for instance, there's this enemy that's on this narrow platform that is really tough, and you're meant to be scared and run away. So, you know, it's got this big shield and there's a narrow ledge, so you can't even throw bombs at it. But there are ways around that. You can use a really rare item to distract it, or freeze it, or go up on this ledge and throw a bomb sound on it, or you can just walk around. There's actually a way to like circumnavigate the entire level. And that's not the quote-unquote intended way, but there's enough wiggle room that someone might manage to do that. And I think that's great, because that means in both ways you sort of have an exciting player experience. One is, wow, I got past this enemy because I was clever or brave or whatever. I used my items in an interesting way. Wow, I'm in this place that I feel like I broke the game to get into, and that's really exciting. Or the player will detect, hey, I can sort of tell that I think I could get past this enemy, but I don't know how. And then again, it's this path that exists in their mind, something exciting to look forward to, an extra, you know, oh, this item, I'm not sure what it does, maybe it's related to this enemy, maybe there's something on the other side of that, like it gets their imagination going. So those are soft gates and hard gates. There's also a Fern Gate, which is a version where, we really want most players to actually need the key, but for speedrunners, for instance, we've got a little clip here. I don't know if audio is going to come through, but this is 100% run by Glacia, a speedrunner who is going to clip through this door by using some fancy techniques. We put in a little sound effect there. We knew that it was technically possible to get through this by doing some shenanigans like that. So we put a little audio cue in saying, yeah, we see you, speedrunners. Okay, important one, I think, is making things optional, is being okay with having features of your game be something that isn't actually required. And that gives you suddenly a lot of power to make people have this feeling of, wow, I really discovered something, because, again, it's you know, somewhat exclusive. So, for instance, there's a way you can run or sprint in the game that we sort of gently allude to in the manual a couple of times, but there's no big tutorial pop-up or whatever. And that means that when people do eventually figure it out or bumble into it or whatever, they're excited. They made a discovery. At least that's the hope. Hopefully they're not annoyed that they didn't know about it earlier. But because there's no point where they really, really, really need to know about this, there's a lot of latitude design-wise for when they make that discovery. Similarly, there's on the map, so baked right into the halftone shader, there's a "You Are Here" icon on the map. And if we had, the first time you open the manual, if there was a big pop-up that says, "You've got a map, here's the "You Are Here" icon," people would be like, okay, cool, video game, got it. But by not telling people that and letting them notice, like, hey, wait a second, what's this little icon mean? It moves when I move, right? They've solved a mystery. There's an exciting little thing there. And yeah, if we had just told people that that was a feature, it wouldn't have been nearly as exciting. There's this hidden spot here that if you slip behind these trees, you go down into a changing room that lets you customize the like color makeup of your fox, the color of your tunic and your fur and stuff, and entirely optional. But it only takes someone looking over your shoulder or looking at a live stream or a screenshot or something to be like, hey, wait, why is your fox blue? How'd you do that? Totally optional, fun secret. There's actually an even more secret, even more optional secret room inside the secret room. Secret rooms inside of secret rooms are the best. We spent some time talking about the percentage of people that we wanted to find the secret their first run through. So we would talk about, for instance, 90% secrets and 10% secrets. as an example. So this is right at the beginning of the game. This doesn't really count as a secret, but the same logic applies. This is a 99% thing. We want people to go into this door and get the first item of the game, the stick. You can skip it if you want to, or you miss it or whatever, that's fine. The game accommodates for that, but we want most people's experience to include finding a weapon. And so we do all the normal game design tricks. We have a path going into it. It's decorated. It's got a special awning. There are lights coming from inside and lights flanking it. Like, we really want to draw your eye there. But we can use the same techniques for other things, like this little path here off to the side. We want only, like 10 or 15% of people to find that one, and have it be sort of this special secret for a few folks. And we do all the same tricks, really. We direct the eyes away from it this time. So we've got a set of stairs that go to a bridge that line up in a particular way, and we put an item on the other side, and the place that we don't want them to look at is sort of covered in shadows. So we're directing the eye away from that to try and keep that percentage low to 10% or whatever. And people will eventually find it as they play through the game by coming through that path from the other direction. And that's why we're hiding it initially, so that when they come from the other direction, they sort of have this like, oh wow, this was here the whole time, right? Feeling, which is in and of itself kind of cool, but for the 15% of people who find it early, they feel even cooler, right? And percentages change. So for instance, right next to that area, there's some chests that are hidden here that might be pretty low percentage early on, but later on when people have done that thing and come through that little secret passage, they're primed to nose around a little bit more. So like, oh, there's more here than meets the eye. Maybe I should poke around and see what I can find in the corners. And finally, having some 0% secrets, I think, is valuable. So in Tunic, there are a couple of those. There's this mysterious glyph tower in the end game that only shows up when you've found a bunch of hidden secret stuff, and when you go in, it's really inscrutable. It's a bunch of strange glyphs floating in the air, blah, blah, blah. You need to uncover a secret language and put in a secret code and go to an external URL. Like, you gotta do a lot of stuff. There's a secret save file that has a double secret inside it, where if you combine the presence of that with a mechanic that's barely mentioned, you can uncover a sort of prototype world as an Easter egg that is sort of a very, very old original version of the world. And the audio designer, Kevin Regami, hid an entire second secret language in the arpeggios and music working with James Kwan and Terrence Lee. And collectively, all of these things we call content for no one, which is not strictly true, because there's a few reasons why you would add this. Like, why would you add content for no one? No one's going to see it. That seems like a very inefficient way to spend our valuable development budget. But it does a few neat things. I like it when it's in games as a player. First of all, someone's going to find it probably, depending on the audience for your game. Someone's going to, rip assets or solve the puzzles or whatever, or work as a community to solve it. And that feels neat, because if you've hidden it, so you've been arbitrarily sneaky, hiding all of your cool stuff, then the people solving it will feel like they, again, really solved something. This was not just a task that I did, this was a puzzle that I figured out. And if they do find it, that's great. And there's the other possibility, which is you hide it so well, no one actually figures it out. Maybe they try, but they don't get it, and the content at the end of that is actually for no one. And all is not lost. Like, don't worry about it, because I think that's cool for a more subtle reason, and that is that its mere presence is a little bit philosophical, but I think its mere presence in the game radiates mystery. People are smart, they can play a game. If they see puzzle pieces and they're not sure how they fit together, or they seem strange, they don't seem like they fit into the normal arrangement of puzzle pieces, there's something missing. Players will know that there's more to this than meets the eye. Maybe it's their intuition, or maybe they hear something on, whispered on a Discord, or hear their friends talk about it on the playground or whatever, right? They'll know that there's more to this than meets the eye. And that's really, really exciting. And that is a special gift, I think, because going back to our model of the paths here, that's a path that just goes on and on and on, and maybe disappears into the distance forever. I managed to do this in 34 minutes, which is good, but hopefully that'll help get us back on track. I don't know if anybody wants to do any questions, or if we want to just move on. We can do that later.
Yeah, you're here for questions.
Okay.
We all good. Lots of questions.
I wonder if there were other games that you maybe played growing up that were influential on this game that had that, this was here all along feeling that would appeal to you and you viewed into the game.
Yeah, totally. So, standard fare of like, Zelda games and stuff like that. Although I don't think I played Zelda 1 until a little bit later in life. But so this NES game called Star Tropics. And the first dungeon in Star Tropics has a cool secret in it. You go in, you get a cool item. And that room also has another secret room in it. And if you go through there, you get another cool prize. And that room has a secret in it. If you open that door, you go through, you fall to your death immediately. There's just a pin. And that, to me, that felt so hostile. Like, it wasn't a designer doing that. It was just this, sinister dungeon that did that. And that was maybe a touchstone. I don't think anything that mean happened in Tunic necessarily, but that was definitely an inspiration. Do you want to like sweep left or right, maybe?
You're like,
I just wanted to ask you a question about your example with the map, how it was like a mini, you figure out that this icon moves when you move. So oftentimes when we think about like game user interfaces, we kind of separate the interface from the game sometimes to make the interface usable and the game purposely not. But we've seen examples like, for example, like Dead Space that combine the UI into the suit instead. So I guess my question is more like, how are you balancing what is meant to be mysterious and what is meant to be accessible when the map, which is kind of a UI interface, crosses over in between that? Or are you trying to bury the UI within the game? Or did you view that separation?
That's a good question. MC, should I be repeating questions, or can people at the back hear the question? Is that okay? Yes, okay, good. So yeah, there are definitely some, so I think the short answer is deciding whether or not something is optional or critical path. So for instance, assigning, UI-wise, assigning items to buttons. We did testing on that and made sure that it worked well. Like, we did have a thing where you needed to hold a button, and that was problematic for accessibility reasons, so now it was just a tap optionally, and that's important. You need to assign items to buttons in order to finish the game. Having the "you are here" on the map is less important. It's sort of a nice, fun treat for discovery purposes, and so it was okay to have that be sort of more obscured and like baked into the have-to and shape of it. But for things that are critical path, that are essential for someone having an enjoyable experience, then yeah, there are accessibility options for turning off combat damage or reducing it. Like, we didn't hide that in a weird secret code. That we considered it, like, wouldn't that be on theme to have certain options be obfuscated somehow to make it feel like you were putting in a cheat code or something? But that is sort of antithetical to the idea of accessibility. You just want to be able to go into the menu and be like, no combat damage for me, please, or turn the flashing off or whatever, right? That needed to be very straightforward. So yeah, that was the decision that we had to make.
Thank you.
Okay, sweep continuing. Here we go.
My question kind of dovetails off of your Zelda example, talking about expectation. Are there any instances where you kind of set up a pattern or set up an expectation maybe 4 or 5 times and then break it for effect, or to kind of make the player feel like it's even more unexpected?
I don't think that, the game's not quite long enough to do the 4 or 5 times and break expectations, but there's a little bit of, like, oh, I go into a forest fortress and I fight a boss. Great. I go into a castle in the sky and I fight a boss. And now I go into a subterranean alien complex, which is a little bit of a violation of expectations there. Like not having your important MacGuffin items be in the dungeon where you need them, I think is a good way to do it. But I like this idea a lot, and I'd like to see games do that where it's, I think actually like Zelda 3 did this a little bit, where you do a couple of dungeons, and then there's a dungeon where you go outside. You need to leave the dungeon, you need to come back in from the other side. That I think is kind of neat. Oh, it's lots of questions. Okay, I'm gonna restart my sweep.
I was curious if when building the game design behind Tunic with the mystery, did you draw inspiration from other game genres that are built upon like that knowledge phase and learning to apply like items or tasks and everything? Like I think of point-click adventure games, how you shove a plank in your pocket 2 hours ago and then find out where to use it later. Did you draw inspiration from other genres or types of games outside of like the Zelda likes?
Yeah, I think so. I spent a lot of time making hidden object games before I worked on this project, which are basically point-click adventure games. And so yeah, a lot of that like use item on thing. Like I think actually the action adventure genre, if we want to trace it back to like Zelda 1, is an action game with adventure game elements, like use raft on dock or whatever, right? So yeah, definitely a little bit of inspiration there as well, especially building a directed acyclic graph, a sort of like network of requirements of which items you need to do other things. I started with that and then realized that the soft gate thing didn't really work with that. Like a point-click adventure is very strictly like, no, you need the screwdriver in order to open the thing. But if you suddenly have exception lines for all of those things, that diagram sort of falls apart. So I guess a better answer to the question is I started with that and then realized that there were some ways where it was fundamentally incompatible.
I've got a question, speaking of mysteries. You kind of touched on it on one slide about that 7-year journey that you undertook to create this amazing project. And I was just kind of curious, personally I had heard about it. Someone told me when I was in San Francisco that this amazing game was developed. I live in Nova Scotia and I had no idea what was going on. But I'd love to hear more about your journey through that 7 years and what that was like. I'm sure there was a lot of trials and tribulations, probably an understatement.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if we have time for the full like 7-year journey, but like I guess yeah, a lot of patience and like maybe financially or like mental health wise, like what?
Could be anything. I think I'm sure it touches on all those areas.
It does, yeah, for sure. So yeah, maybe that might be a better question for offline, but yeah, it's a bit of a journey for sure. I guess briefly, getting help from other people was really useful. Like it was a solo project to start, and sort of accrued people for audio and business development along the way. As I realized, like, oh, I'm way in over my head. I need some help doing this sort of stuff. So having the support of a community, that sort of thing definitely helped in both in financial and mental health capacities for sure.
First of all, it's a very interesting talk. You're really putting Nova Scotia on the map.
Wow.
But in terms of designs and mysteries, what drives the layered designs in your world? Is it the mysteries that you find and you tune your world around it, or you create your world and you see what mysteries does the world call for?
So typically when I was working on like a particular area, there would be a list of requirements, like things that I knew I wanted to include in it, and the design, like the path through it needed to sort of overlap so players would witness things in a particular order. More generally, yeah, I think it probably started with a big list of cool things that I wanted to happen, and then the areas were built around those. Sort of, yeah, list of cool things that need to happen, like there's a power grid or you fight a wizard, and then a list of environments and sort of vibes that might make sense, and trying to weave those together. And often trashing it entirely and starting over a number of times for sure. Oh, there we go.
So, with the example of the vulnerable wall, where it's something that is kind of hidden in plain sight, it is really great to have the hidden in plain sight, but how do you avoid the issue that vulnerable walls also have of, oh no, this could be everywhere, and ultimately, okay, now I have to bomb every single wall that I see. How do you avoid creating a secret that then becomes, in a way, annoying to try and find? This doesn't really happen. So how do you avoid that?
There's, yeah, So yes, just reading the question, how do you avoid the problem of, oh, there are abominable walls? How exciting, there are now, oh no, all these places that I need to bomb. Design-wise, I think if I was to try and approach that again, I would try and make sure the player realizes that they don't need to do that. And that's an impossible problem, I think, because people are inherently completionists, and I think that can make a game worse, is a completionist mindset. But because you can't really fight human nature, the way that we do it in Tunic is have a cue, but one that is non-obvious. So cracking a wall, no joy there. Like you see that and you're like, oh, I gotta find some bombs and I'll get $20, I bet. But if they really appear like they could be anywhere, wow, this is really exciting. But then you notice the cue, which in Tunic is 3 flowers positioned, rotated 45 degrees differently than every other flower in the game. Then suddenly you're like, wait, all these spots where I've seen flowers is what I'm gonna be looking for. I don't need to bomb every wall, I just need to keep an eye out. So I think having like a non-obvious cue for that sort of thing helps, as opposed to literally every location could be a possible secret.
Yeah, that is really good, thank you.
One more question.
One more question? All right, who has the best question? You raised your hand the highest.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Somebody up there, fight it out.
You showed earlier, you showed an example of like the workshop points in Zelda. A lot of that, like you mentioned, that's kind of comes from understanding the history of the series as it evolved. If you were making something like a Tunic 2, how do you avoid training players who played the first game into figuring out or understanding the methodology behind finding secrets
Right.
in a potential sequel? Is that like how you don't capture once?
Yeah, no idea. I had no idea how to. The whole idea was violating expectations and sort of like having a reveal of like, oh, I thought the game was this, and you peel back the layer and it's something else, and you peel back that layer and it's something else. I've run out of layers, so I don't know. If you figure it out, let me know. Is that all we got time for?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you, everybody, very much.